So our panelists are Michelle Hegwood, who is a painter and education associate at the Guggenheim Museum. Rachel Selekman, who is a sculptor and archivist at the Dan Flavin Estate. Fawad Khan, who is a painter and graphic designer for White House Black Market and art director for White House Black Market. And Joshua Haycraft, who is a video artist and is now teaching at Westwood College in Washington, D.C. All right, so Michelle Hegwood. By using a combination of photography, drawing, and digital media, Michelle Hegwood explores the relationships between virtual, natural, and built environments, searching for the ideal or catastrophic results that might occur when they are combined. Originally from Nashville, Michelle has been on the East Coast since 1998 when she moved to Baltimore to attend MICA. She received her MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts in 2009. She was a resident at the Creative Alliance here in Baltimore from 2009 to 2010 and had a research residency at the Center for Marine Biotechnology through the University of Maryland. She has exhibited regionally and nationally. In 2010, she had a solo show at Metro Gallery and has recently exhibited at the Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, Washington, Maryland Art Place, and the Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition. Michelle's work has appeared in New American Paintings, and she was a semi-finalist for the U.S. Fulbright Student Program and the Janet and Walter Sondheim Prize in 2010. In tandem with her practice as a visual artist, Michelle has been working in museum education since 2004. She spent 6 years at the Walters Art Museum working with family programming, exhibition, planning, and gallery interpretation. In 2010, she relocated to New York City to become education associate for the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum's Learning Through Art program. In this most recent endeavor, Michelle coordinates artist residencies in New York public schools, curates a related children's exhibition at the museum, and is responsible for disseminating the 5-year U.S. Department of Education study, The Art of Problem Solving. In combination with these experiences, the combination of these experiences have led Michelle to question how the artist can situate herself within the natural world, the urban landscape, and sites for learning as an explorer, writer, scientist, educator, or one who embraces all. Rachel Selekman explores the dynamics of relationships and of intimacy through her sculptures. She's interested in how people engage and interact, how they communicate, hear, listen, see, and touch. These scenarios take form in mixed media sculptures that have watering can bases or watering can remnants, stand-ins for the human body and skin, respectively. The work references the body, utilizing everyday objects and engaging the viewer with elements that reach out and draw them in with rich and intriguing interiors and exteriors. Rachel has been an active artist and arts administrator since she got her BFA from MICA in 1985. She returned to Philadelphia, where she grew up after college, and got a job at Dolan Maxwell Gallery, inspired to seek employment in the visual arts after her experience as a volunteer at MICA's Student Art Run Gallery. In 1988, Dolan Maxwell opened a branch in New York City, and Rachel moved there as director of the gallery. All the while, she continued to make her own art, showing her sculptures and mixed media works in various group exhibitions. In 1991, she went back to school to get her MFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she received a full tuition scholarship. Upon completing her degree, she moved back to New York and has lived there ever since. From 1993 on, she has zigged and zagged between full-time and freelance arts administration positions, including 7 years as director of the 92nd Street Wise Art Center. Today, she is the archivist and project coordinator at the Dan Flavin Estate and also freelances as an editor, proofreader, and bookkeeper. She has had solo shows at AIR Gallery in New York, Chaos Gallery in Cologne, Germany, the Delaware Center for the Contemporary Arts in Wilmington, Priska C. Juszka Fine Art in New York. Her work has been included in many national and international group exhibitions and is in numerous public and private collections, including that of the Museum of Modern Art. She's received a Pollock Krasner Grant in 1997, a Henry Street Settlement Abrams Art Center residency in 2007, and recently a grant to participate in the New York Foundation for the Arts Artist as Entrepreneur Boot Camp. Currently, she's working with an independent curator on a 20-year survey of her work that will travel to college and university galleries and include an educational component and catalog as well. All right. Using a chaotic, explosive mix of shattered particles and subject matter, such as autos, camouflage, I-beams, traffic cones with bursts of color, Fawad Khan's art comments on violent imagery in contemporary culture, oppressive military culture, and the current political climate. Though primarily a painter, Fawad has frequently worked with collage, animation, and sculpture installation in his work as well, sculptural installation. Fawad was born in 1978 in Tripoli, Libya, and lives and works in New York now. In 2003, he received his MFA from School of the Visual Arts in New York and his BFA from MICA in 2001. He also, while at MICA, studied at the Center for Art and Culture in Aix-en-Provence, France. He has participated in several residency programs, including the Lower East Side Print Shop and the Artists in the Marketplace program through the Bronx Museum. He has been included in museum exhibits at the Bronx Museum of Arts, the Indianapolis Museum of Art, solo exhibitions at Lou Magnus, New York, Galleria Leyendecker in Santa Cruz de Tenerife, Spain. Sorry if I'm butchering that. And at Shrine Empire Gallery in New Delhi, India. Alongside his art exhibits and residencies, Fawad works on the creative marketing team for White House Black Market, a fast-growing fashion retail brand. He arrived there after previous roles at the fashion advertising agency Laird and Partners, where he was a graphic designer on accounts such as Donna Karan, Nautica, and Gap, and as a senior designer at Ann Taylor Loft. And our final participant is Joshua Haycraft. For the last 7 years, Joshua has been slowly designing a universe. Over this time, he has developed a government, a religion, an education system, and an economy, bundling it all under the ambiguous acronym BHB-ITB. He has developed educational videos, prayers, recreational activities, and products, all with a slick surface and a hollow core, a culture by IKEA. The goal of BHB-ITB is to specify every detail of an entire universe, a completely self-referential space, and eliminate any allusion to the real world. Joshua studied industrial design at the University of Wisconsin-Stout and worked for a number of years as a designer. During this time, he co-founded Level Artist Collective in Minneapolis and began working on BHB-ITB. In 2009, he moved to Baltimore to attend MICA, graduating from the Mount Royal School of Art. He has exhibited his work locally, nationally, and internationally, with recent shows at Baltimore School 33 and the University of Chiang Mai in Thailand, and the Copy 9 Gallery in London. In 2009, he was awarded a fellowship to attend the Vermont Studio Center residency, and he is currently a semi-finalist for the Sondheim Prize. He's now teaching design and animation at Westwood College and will be teaching special effects for video at MICA this summer. So, I'm going to show a quick video of Joshua's work too. So now, if our panelists would join us, or going to come up to the table, and we'll start our discussion. Yeah. Did you guys want some water? Anybody? Want some? Okay. All right. So, I wanted to start by asking you guys to tell our audience about your first job that you had after completing undergraduate, and maybe how you got that job. So, who wants to start?
I'll start. I'm the oldest. I got my job at a gallery called Maxwell in Philadelphia. Actually, I have to say, I did the Great Escape after college, after I got graduated, and my sister and I went to Europe for 2.5 months and backpacked. So I definitely did not go straight into the work world, but I did once I returned. And I applied, as Rachel mentioned, I did some volunteer work at the school gallery here. And even though I majored in graphic design, I realized at the end of my education that I really wanted to be a fine artist and didn't want to pursue graphic design. And so I pretty much didn't know what I was going to do. And then I decided, maybe I should work in a gallery. And I applied through the newspaper. That's how you look for jobs in those days. And I got a job at Maxwell, originally 3 days a week. And within about 6 months, I was there full time, and I ended up being with the company for 6 years, 3 years in Philadelphia, and then when the gallery opened in Soho, that's how I got up to New York.
So my first job was, I was in retail actually from high school, and I was almost doomed to a life in retail, I feel like, but right after I was actually the day of graduation from MICA, I found out that I had gotten this job at a bead store. You guys probably know it, Bedazzle on the street. So that was my first post-graduation job. I don't remember much of the process for getting that job. It was all a blur. It was like frantic gasp for a job as soon as I graduated, and I got locked out. And anyway, so I did that for 2 years, but 1 year into it, I started working part-time at the Walters Art Museum because I quickly realized that while beads were fun and colorful and I got to design things, this was not my career path. And so I kind of nosed my way into museum education through a part-time job, and then eventually worked my way up the ranks. And then ended up at Guggenheim.
My first job was, coming out of school, I didn't want anything to do with art. I was kind of over design, which was my major. I was just needing a little time off, so I started selling things on eBay for a guy. And realized I didn't want to do that, and that I did want to, in fact, work as a designer. A friend of mine came across a job at a place he was working, told me to submit my stuff. Then I got, maybe 6 months after that, my first job was a retail designer. And then after doing that for a couple years, realized that I, in fact, did not want to do design and wanted to be an artist.
My first job is actually an interesting story. I left Dodge as well. I graduated from MICA in 2001 and went straight to New York directly. Just want to hit the ground running. And I thought, suck it up, go get an internship, paid or unpaid. And I got a job as an intern with Exit Art, which is a long-standing, one of the oldest nonprofits in New York City. And while I was learning about the contemporary art world and all these amazing artists that are kind of, practicing now, the director had said, hey, why don't you bring some of your paintings by? I want to see some of your work. I brought my paintings in and I scuffed up the marble lobby outside, and the building manager got pissed off and ran in and started screaming at the director of Exit. And I ran out and I was like, oh, and I was like trying to like, I had no money to my name. I just graduated and I kind of was like, what do I do? And I'm like, Tony, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'll pay for it. What did I do? What did I do? And it's like, he was so shocked at that he was like, Jeanette, who is that kid? And she was like, well, he's looking for a job. He needs a job. He's a painter, but he needs a job. And, the building manager said a company just moved in upstairs. So I ran upstairs to the 7th floor, and it was an ad agency that had just moved into the building, and they were just starting. And they were looking for designers, and what's kind of great is that while I was learning all the fine art stuff at Exit Art, the same time for 3 weeks straight, I just kept going up there and bugging this one woman with my portfolio until they would let me in as a freelancer. And then I started working in advertising while I kept doing my art, and it's been like that ever since.
All right. So now that you're at this point in your career, how has having a full-time job in the arts benefited or contrastly hindered your practice as a fine artist? Do you want to start, Fawad?
Yeah, I'll start. Well, in my case, this just leads off the previous story. I mean, that first job I had was pretty rigorous. I mean, the hours were nuts because it was, a proper ad agency and the clients were very demanding. And I was just cutting my teeth on graphic design. I took a few classes here, but I was really an illustration major, and I was primarily, working with painting instructors, and even the study abroad in France was painting director. So the agency, I ended up, kind of curtailing my art practice for a little while, and I would work all these long hours, and what happened was that kind of hindered me in the beginning. But as that career kind of grew, I was able to leave within, a couple of years and go somewhere else and finally start to control my hours and start to say, okay, well, I'll work somewhere where there is more of a life-work balance and you can sustain an art practice or maintain some sort of studio hour routine. So for me, that was kind of my handicap in the beginning, but eventually I came back and found a way to fit the other thing in.
Yeah, I would say that coming out of school, and even the job I have right now, I've learned way more. I mean, it's on-the-job training is totally different than anything you get in the classroom, and it really pushes you to take it from, that A grade that you get, effort you would put out for an A grade in college is, 2,000% more effort once you're doing it for money. So you just hone your skills, and then even now as a teacher, I feel like I have more time to work on my own things, but it also forces me to really know what I'm talking about and what I'm doing. So, I think it's great. I get paid to learn in a certain sense, but you definitely, I'm required to know what I'm talking about and stay up to date with all that.
It's funny because promotion is a big thing. As a fine artist, and I feel like we're in the studio, we're painting all the time, we're making sculptures, whatever it is we're doing, you forget that there's that other skill. And it's like in those initial years at the agency, I learned stuff that now I use in my art practice to promote myself, just free PR.
Needless to say, because I worked in a gallery, I got a great education about life as an artist. So, like I said, I started as a gopher. I mean, I was super entry level. I was entry level. And I think it's important to, you come out of school, you have an education, you have various work experience. But if you're looking for a job in an area that you haven't worked in, then entry level is where you're going to enter. And sometimes you feel like you're beyond that, but think about it and realize that if this is new to you, that's what you got to do. You've got to get your first job. It's likely to be an entry-level job, but everybody starts there, and it's the place to start. But obviously, being with the same company for 6 years, I learned a lot on the job, and it was an invaluable experience. started just labeling slides and filing slides, because of course digital didn't even exist then. But as time went on, I got more and more experience. And the hard thing in my position for me was the fact that I wanted to keep a boundary between my life as an artist and my job. Because I was living in Philly at the time, curator from the Philadelphia Museum came in, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to show this guy my work. But the fact of the matter is, he's here to see the Jasper Johns print, and everybody's going to handle that negotiation differently. It doesn't mean that you're not developing a mailing list. It doesn't mean that you can become friendly with somebody, and when the time is right, you tell them you're an artist. Maybe they want to see your work, et cetera, but that balance or that negotiating of what I felt was proper in terms of like my job versus my life as an artist was something that I just had to, I had to do what was comfortable for me. And for a lot of that time, I felt like I just had to focus on my job and not be promoting myself. But years later, you come to meet those people in different settings, they get to know your work, all sorts of different things.
I really relate to this idea of the learning on the job. I went straight into museum education, and suddenly I found this place where I was actually interested in art history. I wasn't. When I was at MICA, I just didn't appreciate it. And in addition to learning about teaching and becoming really invigorated by that work, I developed a whole new relationship with artwork, with art history, and then eventually with contemporary work as well. It's this ongoing education experience. And so I guess that would be my answer to how my work fuels my art practice, is that I'm just constantly surrounded by new ideas and new material, and I work with teaching artists in my job, which is really valuable to me, because I'm not just seeing work, I'm talking to people about work constantly in my job. I'm exploring artwork with children, and I'm discussing pedagogy and theory with teaching artists. So I feel like I'm constantly working, and the challenge for me is coming home and trying to enter the studio space and trying to edit out all of those voices and find, like, where is Michelle the artist? And like having to sort of put blinders on to an extent. And I think that's where that boundary becomes a little bit tricky, especially in my case, where I feel like I'm not only having to draw a line between the promotion and the marketing side of it, but also having to sort of focus in on the ideas that are important to me. So it's a good problem to have, though, I feel like. I mean, and then in terms of the time, that's an obvious. I do not have enough time, point blank, to make work. I think that I'm at a point in my career where I'm looking forward and hoping that I will learn how to carve out the time better. But that said, I make it. I make the time. Weekends are sacred time for me, and I'm getting into like other questions.
That's okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, I just also wanted to say, there's no right answer in terms of whatever you choose. There's no right answer, and nothing is a life sentence. So what you do when you get out of school and what you do 5 years later, I mean, because I've zigged and zagged between freelance, full-time job, and now I have a great part-time steady job, I just know that making those transitions, which are really scary at first, are just part of the process. And the fact of the matter is, I had no choice but to get a full-time job when I got out of school, unless I wanted to live with my parents for the rest of my life. And what that facilitated is I had health insurance. I could have my own apartment, which also had to be my studio. And the likelihood is that when you're you're just out of school, your day job is going to support you as an individual, and it's going to support your studio practice. So it's not even like you have the luxury of just getting a job to support eating, going out, those kinds of things. It's also got to support the extra expenses of your lifestyle as an artist. And, you know, in some ways also having a full-time job where you have vacation paid, you have vacation days, you have your health insurance paid. For some, that peace of mind and that job security and knowing you got that steady paycheck versus freelance is just going to give you the psychic space to make art. And again, that's an individual decision and it changes over time, but it's not, you know, getting a full-time job does not put the first nail in your art-making coffin by any stretch of the imagination. No, absolutely.
Thank you. I thought those were really great answers. My next question I'm asking because I have a lot of students coming to me and alumni too, really wanting to know when is the right time to go to graduate school. They think that they want to go at some point, but they don't know whether they should go directly after school or how long is too long to wait. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about, you've all gone to graduate school, and if you could talk about what was happening in your life at that time that you decided, okay, now is really the time for me to go back.
For me, it was when I was working as a designer, like 60, 80-hour weeks, and then
And you want it out.
yeah, and then talking about trying to come home. I mean, it's almost better to not have a job that's creative, because then you can just save it all up when you go home to work on your stuff. But to work and be professionally creative, and then to go home and try to like eke out another 3 or 4 hours is, yeah, it's really tough. Yeah, so I had a studio practice. I had this group of guys that were all, kind of collectively working towards, something other than our job. And we all kind of collectively applied to grad school and left because we weren't really happy with what we were doing, I guess. There's something else I was going to mention about that. Oh, so I quit my job to substitute teach. Substitute teaching is a great job because there's not a whole lot of pressure and you have a whole lot of time to just make art. If all you want to do is make art, substitute teaching is great. If you can put up with the kids. Don't go elementary school.
I once met an artist who was a flight attendant. And, if you're a flight attendant, you have a lot of days off. And it's like anything, substitute teaching, flight, there's no job that if you can stand it and it gives you time to work, power to you.
Yeah.
Well, so I was actually in, I feel like, a different situation because I felt very married to my job. I was like, oh my goodness, I work at an art museum. Like, I can't leave my job. Job work is horrible. But my studio practice was boring, to say. I was making paintings. I was selling them too and showing them, but I wasn't able to articulate what I was doing. They weren't interesting to me. I knew that I was missing out on a bigger conversation. I knew I wasn't engaged with people, thinking critically. And so it took me 3 years to finally decide, and it took me 3 years to find the program that was right for me because I chose to do a low residency program so that I could keep my job. There are many times where I'm like, why didn't I just take a break and experience 40 hours in the studio a week, But it's what I needed at the time, and I don't regret it. I learned how to maintain a studio practice in tandem with my job, and it was the best exercise I could have possibly done. I would not be able to make work right now if I hadn't had that experience. But the decision was also because I felt like I was being sucked into this museum education vortex, and the pressure was on to get a master's, and I think everyone expected me to get it in museum education, So I found a dual personality grad program that worked.
I definitely advocate for taking time off in between degrees wholeheartedly. I think it's really important to, number one, have an opportunity to develop your artistic voice outside of school before going to grad school. And I think it's also important to enter the workaday world and figure out how to negotiate what everybody, all artists, undergraduate degree artists have to negotiate. Because I majored in graphic design, I took a lot of fine arts classes when I was here, but certainly not as many as a major would take. And so I felt kind of behind the 8 ball when I got out of undergraduate school and really felt like, okay, now I've got to figure out what do I want to make art about? What is important to me? What do I want to work with? What materials? All that kind of stuff. So so that was part of the reason why I needed time, because I wasn't ready to go to graduate school. And my job was super exciting, and it was also really nice to be out of school for a while. And 6 years, why was it 6 years and not 10 or 4 or whatever? I always knew I wanted to go to grad school. Like I said, I felt I really needed to develop my work. I also had this great job that then brought me to New York. And it's funny because, like you, I was really enmeshed in my job. And I applied to graduate school to go in 1990 and got accepted to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. But I felt so enmeshed in my job that I deferred admission because I was like, okay, that'll give me a year to extricate myself from, because I'm the director of the gallery, and I was just like, you were just too in it. So it definitely took, it was great to have that transitional year. And then when I went, needless to say, it was the great escape. And after working full-time for 6 years and being able to focus on my work for 2 years in a new environment and in a different environment, I was like right, ready, and totally engaged. And I sort of thought everybody else was going to be as well, but I've learned it just doesn't work that way. And it doesn't matter, some of them may have gone from undergrad to grad and they were totally engaged, and others, maybe they took time off and weren't engaged, but I took full advantage of it. And the other advantage was when I left graduate school, the students that I was there with who had gone from undergraduate to grad were completely freaked out about what they were going to do next. And I was like, I'm going back to New York and getting a job. No big deal. Been there, done that.
Well, for the very same reason that Rachel probably needed that time, I too needed time in school. So I actually am the antithesis. I went directly to graduate school after undergrad. I think I'm the only one out of all 4 of us. And for me, it's that when I was finishing MICA, yes, I had the tools. Yes, I knew that I wanted to pursue a career in the art. I had to find a way to survive. But what I needed to do was I knew that I wanted to move on from Baltimore and get to an art center. And at that time, I had my eyes set on New York. So grad school for me was really more or less more time in the studio, kind of forced time to really figure out, to kind of expand on my thesis, because I felt that it didn't quite resolve or work through it for me here, and I wanted to push the idea further for 2 more years. And also the second tier to that was, it was great because I used graduate school as a mode to get me into New York City. While I was in grad school, I was able to apply for that internship and find work within a city that I wanted to thrive in as an artist. So in a way, I think what your job did for you, this going to grad school did for me. It just depends on how you look at it. But I'm a proponent of it because I do have a lot of friends that have done it that way. They've gone direct. And then I also have a ton of friends that took time off after school, a few years, 5, 6, 2, whatever, and they've gone to grad school. And then I have friends who haven't. Believe it or not, we're all still friends. We're all at the same level. We do what we do, and we all get together for beers and all that. And we joke about it because the truth is, for everybody, it's a different story. depends on whether you're ready for it.
All right, so I have a few more questions, but if there's any audience questions that you have, panelists, is there anybody that has something specific they want to ask? Yeah.
How did you all finance grad school, especially you went on straight from grad school to, or undergrad to grad school?
It's funny, I just paid off my MBA. MICA helped. MICA was, obviously mom and dad helped with MICA. Undergrad was nuts. But graduate school, what was great was with my portfolio from here, I was able to apply for scholarships with the help of, I think it was career development. or Teresa and admission. I don't know, a lot of advisors here, a lot of people really took it upon themselves to be great mentors and advisors, especially my instructors. And they were like, no, put that in, no, move that slide around and do it in this order. And what was great was I was able to get a little over half of my tuition in grad school paid for through the scholarships. And then when I went, the work study helped because it was paid, the internship I had. The rest I've been trying to pay off. Yeah, it's done.
My answer is simple. I borrowed money. I'm still paying it off. I mean, working while going to school helps, certainly, but
I'm still paying MICA, by the way. Probably,
Yeah, I was very fortunate because I did get a full tuition scholarship to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. But I do think it's an important point. I have a friend who went to Columbia, and the cost of grad school is significant. And in a way, if you're majoring in fine art, you're not coming out of it with a marketable skill like you would if you went to, got an MBA, got a law degree, got, even in graphics or production or, any number of things. So I think it's something to think about seriously because that debt is with you potentially for the rest of your life. And there are state schools and there are scholarships and, you just need to do your homework. And it's a valuable education. I mean, I would have gone had I not gotten the scholarship. But of course, after getting it and then realizing when I got out that I wasn't in debt and wasn't carrying essentially another rent, it was really a blessing. So it's really something to think about seriously.
I don't really have anything else to add. My friend got his paid for. He went to Oregon. State schools will, they're much smaller programs typically, but they'll pay you to go there, give you a stipend. That's what I told myself I was going to do. And then I didn't find any school that I was particularly interested in, so I went the student loan route. And it hasn't been terrible. It's a burden, but you're just buying. You have to hold off that Mercedes-Benz purchase for.
Do a lot of research too. It's like maybe there's something specifically for women or, there's lots of very sort of odd grants that, maybe you can uncover one that's got your name on it, basically.
Does anybody else have some questions?
How different were the job opportunities after the Masters? Initially, like right fresh out of there.
I have to say, I really wanted to teach. I thought, when I was in grad school, I love being in an educational environment, both as a student and as an educator. And I thought, I'm going to get out of grad school and get a teaching job. But when I got out of school, it was 93, and when the art market, and I did return to New York, and when the art market crashed in New York, a lot of the artists who were not teaching because they were selling all of their work all of a sudden there was sort of a shift. You know, sometimes it's timing, and people were retiring, and these guys had reputations, guys and gals, but mostly men. These guys had reputations, maybe a little teaching experience, but the schools hired them for their names. And I wasn't willing to go to Tennessee for a semester, and then to Arkansas for a semester, and then to Vermont for a semester. So it ended up being a choice I made not to sort of do that route. And there's part of me that really regrets not being able to fulfill that employment drive and interest that I had. But, so in terms of having a master's, you need it if you want to teach at a certain level. You know, not necessarily if you're going to teach kids, but you know, if you want to teach college level, you're going to need the master's. But honestly, besides that, the reason to get the degree is to devote time to your work. It doesn't, in other career areas, it doesn't add to your marketability. You know, a lot of people, you know, although somebody did tell me that the MFA is the new MBA. And I actually think that's important, because one thing that you learn studying art of any form is to be a problem solver, a creative thinker, and critical thinking. And we're not consciously, at least when I was in school, maybe it's different for you guys, we're not consciously educated to be the problem solver and the critical thinker, but it's the nature of art making and problem solving, and even developing your own voice as an artist. So these are skills that are of great interest to people who don't know how to think that way. So for instance, when I was at the 92nd Street Y, and I got pulled into all of these other meetings with the whole organization to brainstorm about this new objective or that new objective, I could have ideas right and left, and everybody else is just sitting around the table, and it's like, you know, hello, anybody in there? So you definitely need to, I know this is sort of a long-winded answer, but I think it's important to be able to self-assess, decide what you're good at, what you're not good at, look at your skills that may not be the kinds of skills that, you know, are super obvious to everybody, like the ones that I've mentioned. So there is value in the art education in that regard, but in terms of an MFA, unless you're going to teach, it's not going to really matter in the market.
I would just add to that, I mean, I agree with the point of doing it for yourself. I always, it's just not worth it if you're not going to get the degree for your own furtherment. But I would add that I think the MFA has been an asset for me in the museum education field. I think that it's a field a lot of people don't know about. You don't make money in museum education. It's fun, but the degree will help you in that environment, and there's a huge diversity of kinds of jobs within that field, and it is one place other than teaching college level that I think that the degree helps. I think that you can find others too in other like nonprofit arts. I think that that's a sector where it also has a lot of value.
In some regards, I think it can also be can hold you back. I mean, if an employer is looking at someone who has a master's, they're going to expect that person with a master's wants more money that they don't necessarily have. They can only afford. I mean, you might be willing to take that, you know, entry-level position, but on paper, they might expect that you would, expect more money. I don't know if that's necessarily true in art. I know some of the design positions, I know that some of my friends have kind of run into that. And you also run into that whole experience versus education. I mean, you might have, years and years of college education, but the person who's been in the field for the last 3 years and has actually, done real, portfolio, and actually done it as opposed to like the theoretical stuff. That's why I think it's also important to go work before you go get your master's, because then you might find that what you think you wanted in undergrad is completely different than what you find out you're good at, or what is actually, the reality is always a little bit different than, this dream you have in your head of what, being a designer or an artist.
Well, I think this is really great, by the way, because I'm an alum. I graduated in 2008, and since I graduated, kind of just been, I started working at my first full-time job like 2 days after I graduated. I just moved directly to Boston and started working right away, and I ended up working full-time and a part-time job on the side just to like get by. And I was also renting a studio space that I was never using because I didn't have any time, and when I did, I was sleeping because I was exhausted. So I started working here, but now I'm also finding that I work evenings, I take work home with me, I travel on the weekends sometimes for what I do. So I know some of you have talked about, like, I think it was Rachel, you mentioned you walked away from being the director of the gallery in New York and decided to like go back to your art. It's like, when do you know that it's time? I feel like I'm missing something by not making my art anymore. And it's like, when do you know that it's time? When did you feel that it was time for you to like make that shift and start to put it more back into your life after a while? And you talked about you worked in a museum and it was hard to step away and go to grad school. I thought about going to grad school. I actually applied to grad school when I was leaving MICA, but then I decided I needed to work to financially support myself. So.
You just have to be thoughtful about it and conscious about it. There's no right time. I mean, it's going to be right for it's going to be different for everybody. But I think it's just, what I find that's just generally important is that the decisions you make as an artist, whether it's staying at a job, deciding to apply to grad school, changing jobs, freelancing, working nights and being exhausted, think about the sacrifices you're making for your art, and then think about the sacrifices you make at your job, and just be really thoughtful and conscious about those decisions. I think if you are thinking about grad school, obviously, like with me, I was like, I don't even have a portfolio.
Yeah.
So I gotta make work.
Yeah.
So it's like, don't look at the end of the story. If you miss making work, just do the bare minimum you can. When I went from freelancing to being director of the 92nd Street Y, it was a 9-hour day, it was a 5-day-a-week job, I had like an hour commute each way, and it was a real shift, and just like, I felt like I was hit by a truck most of the time. And I literally, the only studio work I did for the first year, I did in bed. I'm totally serious. It was like a lot of labor and sewing, and I just was like, I would sit, put my pillows behind me, and I'd take my thread and needle and fabric and what I was doing, and I would watch TV, and that's the work that I was making. And so it's just, you just do the best you can do, and over time that changes. And, explore possibilities, like look into grad schools, decide, it's hard, but you just don't look at the end. Just just look to tomorrow and what you need to do tomorrow, and then eventually you'll be where you want to be.
I think that's a really good point. And I would also say that one of the tricks that I've had to do, I have to just set myself up for the success, and I have to do it on a constant basis because I'm constantly in danger of being pulled permanently into my job.
Yeah.
But I really resisted it, and one of the ways I've done that, I did the residency at the Creative Alliance, which taught me so much because I put myself in an environment where I was constantly reminded that people were making work, and I lived in a studio, so I didn't have an option, and that for me, the space that I set up in my home has become the most important factor. I have had a studio in my home since being at the Creative Alliance. clients. I actually don't think that'll continue because if I know myself, I know that I get tired of the same studio space after like 2 years, and I have to change. But I think you have to, for me, it's changing spaces. And I don't know, I rearrange my studio, I move into a different room, I move the TV as far away as I can. It's just like, it sounds like little silly things, but it's what works for me, and it's how I resist losing the practice.
No, that doesn't sound, I know what you mean. I just moved in November and I haven't set up my studio space since I've moved. And I feel like that's probably hindering it because I can't work in that sort of cluttered, boxed up
I lived in an apartment that had carpet, I didn't make anything.
Yeah.
Never living in an apartment with carpet.
I think if you can, time management has been such a struggle for me, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But I think, obviously, I think that's your end solution maybe to answer, the answer to your own
I'm
problems.
so
but-
organized too, and I can't like find the organized time to make my own work. It just
Right, and
makes
it
me feel
feels like
lazy.
you are. The way you kind of set up, just told us what you've been doing in your journey till now, and the thing is that, okay, that's the end solve, but how are you gonna get there, right? So, you just moved here, you've been here since November, it's what, April, March, March 30th? This is time management. But figure out when that weekend comes where you can set up that studio, and then it's one day at a time. You just kind of and you'll notice then you will have a little bit more flexibility in electing what you need to do to push your studio practice forward, and when you need to devote time to your job.
Mhm.
And it's totally possible to do both. My thing is, man, 85, 95 hours a week
Yeah.
at agency. I'm not joking. And I couldn't get studio hours in. I had to figure out a solve. But then, you think about it. There are CEOs of companies out there who maybe sit on some board of directors, have 2 wives and kids, and PTA and have these numbers to report, whatever the hell they do. We do what we love. And we can't make time for it with our day job. I think we can. Thing is, the motivation has to come from within, and that's that and time management. If you could put those two together, maybe there's a solve ahead. I don't know.
And I think working within your constraints too. I mean, I have to talk about creativity in my job all the time, and the biggest thing to talk about is how constraints make you more creative. I've recently started devising a system where I can draw on the subway and make it a part of beyond just the sketchbook.
Mhm.
And so I just think you just have to broaden your idea
Yeah.
of what the studio is, what you're doing with your time,
Yeah.
wherever you are.
Maybe you need to take a class. I mean, I know that sounds crazy,
Oh, I'm
but
taking
it's-
ceramics.
Makes
I'm
sense.
awful.
Yeah, but that gives you 2 hours,
Yeah.
3 hours
Yeah.
a week to be working creatively. And, I think the other thing is, don't put a square peg in a round hole. It's think about why you're not making the time. And maybe your path is to go in a different direction, which is also fine. So, you sort of have to be self-reflective as well.
I think the greatest thing I learned from design was how to train myself to always be creative. I always hear a lot of students and painters are I just don't feel like it right now. It's it doesn't feel right. And I think with design, when you're getting paid to do it, you train yourself, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make something awesome. And here's the I've got 4 hours and here I go. And train yourself to be thinking about it when you're not in the studio. When I go to this, I don't have a studio right now. I do everything on a computer in my living room, but when I go and sit in front of that computer, I already know what I'm going to do. I've done all the sketches, I've got the ideas in my head, I go there to execute it, and I try to use the time when I'm driving, when I'm on the subway, to figure it out. I used to commute from Baltimore, so I would spend, even just kind of half asleep on the train, kind of thinking about it, but kind of training yourself to just always, and that's all I really ever think about is like, you know, you got half your brain working on half your other brain, you know, listen to what your students are saying.
Is that something,
I should say.
is that something like, is that a habit you created after undergrad or when you started in the workforce, or?
I think it was out of necessity, but it was also like that, you know, when you're in class and you're daydreaming about, you know, what you'd rather be doing. I think that's where it started for me when I was designing. I'd be sitting there, you know, making a plan or something and not wanting to be there. The office was on a lake, like the best lake in Minnesota, so I could see people going to the beach. And I'd just be in there. I'd be there in the morning, and then it'd be dark, and then be there, and then go home. And so I think it was that. It was kind of like I was having it kind of just going in the back of my head, and then when I could make it to the studio, it was, okay, here's all these things that I've been thinking about for the last week. Now I just want to like do it, because this is, you know, it's special time. I can't do this every day.
Sometimes you definitely, you know, I've found that I just need to get into my day job sometimes. And rather than be, you should be in the studio, like basically like slapping yourself around. You know, it's just like, you know, until I get this project done, or until this art fair is over, or until the semester begins when I was at the Y, you know, I'm just going to devote myself to my work and getting rest. And I think that, you know, 3 weeks from now, things will be calm, or whatever the particulars are. And it's really easy. I mean, artists can be the most sort of abusive to oneself type of people, and it's not very productive. And, you know, when you have the time, that's when you should be kicking yourself in the butt. But when you don't have the time, sometimes it's not going to be productive to force yourself to beat up on yourself for just not being able to sleep 3 hours a night and work and be in the studio. Just gotta just get into it and say, you know what, it's okay.
Cindy Sherman had a quote like that, where she said she needed like 6 months just watching TV.
And that was research.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question for you guys, and it's kind of just building on the same topic, and it's twofold and maybe no straight answer. But talking about time in your studios and your full-time jobs, and it's always a difficult balance. So how much time do you think on a weekly basis, and studio being a broad term of whether you're actively in a studio or thinking about it while you're driving, because I think that completely counts. So how much time would you estimate that you actually spend in your studio per week doing your own professional art career? And then the second part of that question would be, how do you fit that into your schedule as it exists? Or do you carve out that time so you say, you know what, Mondays I'm in my studio from 10 to 11:30, and Wednesdays I'm there from 5 to 10. Do you create a schedule for your studio practice, or does it kind of fit into your professional schedule?
I think when
I don't know about my wording on it.
When I first started, for me, I had to carve out time because the other hat that I wore took up so much, you know, of my day and my night sometimes. So I made a plan that I had to find a studio first, and then once I did get one, I was, you know, in court. So it's like, all right, well, I have to make use of it. So I made sure whenever if it wasn't, you know, overnight, or if it was on Sunday or whatever, I'd say probably from the beginning, like fresh out of the gate from like 2003 to 6, maybe 3 to 4 times a week. Now, while I was there, let me tell you, like some of those days I go and I like bum around and I go back out for coffee and then come back and I call friends or whatever. But then maybe there's that Sunday where from the moment you get in to the moment you leave, you just crank, right? But now it's shifted a little. I do it project-based, so when shows or projects come up or opportunities come up and I have time, I modify my work schedule for it. And that again is is because of that life-work balance that I've been able to figure out with my employer. And not hide the fact that I am an artist. When I took the job, I let them know I'm in a residency and I have this, and I might be traveling for the show. Give me this much vacation. And but like the thing is that I think you do have to carve. I had to carve out time. I had to force myself to do it, and you know, my I guess impetus was that I was paying for a studio. I had to make use of that, you know, that money.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's one of the things that attracts me to having a studio outside of my house, is that I know that my practice and my like quality of time will probably improve once I have to force myself to be somewhere for a set amount of time. But I would estimate that my studio time right now is like an average of 20 hours a week, on average. Like, that's like a week where there's not much happening, and then there's, you know, a lot happening, because I work in spurts as well. I sort of like store up energy and then go. But yeah, I want it to be.
Yeah, 20 to 30, I guess, depending on, you know, if there's a particular inspiration or a project that you can get done.
I wish I had 20. You know, it's so hard to sort of qualify it that way. A couple in the fall, I had got a great commission to do 3 works on paper, and I was at that point. I had moved, so I lost like a month or 6 weeks of work time, and I had a deadline for these commissions. And so I was in the studio. Now my job is 3 days a week, so the 2 weekdays and the 2 weekend days, until I got it done for, I don't know, 6, 8 weeks or something like that. I've had much less time in the studio since then. But, you know, life's bigger than the studio, and that's something, you know, when I talked earlier about the sacrifices you're making for your art, there's no guarantees as a fine artist that you're going to get a gallery, that you're going to sell work, that you're going to get a grant or a residency. And so it's important to think about the sacrifices you're making. And so, like, I got married almost 5 years ago, but, you know, I was 43, 44 when I got married, and it's like, you know, I met a great guy. It took me a long time to find him. And we like spending time together. And, you know, people satisfy needs that art does not satisfy. And so it's like, it's important to make time for that too. And so I sort of feel like that's become a priority for me. So that definitely, I mean, being in a relationship definitely cuts into studio time, and you just have to decide if that's worth it. And I find that it is. I mean, even just being with friends is worth it. So it's hard to qualify. In my schedule, it ebbs and flows so much. To give it a weekly is a little hard. And although when I get to a point like now where I've had so little time in the studio, I just cross it off in my calendar and write studio, you know, on the days that I'm not at my job. And it's like, you know, I just try to keep nothing, you know, from infiltrating that day.
For me, I'm the opposite. I really want my studio in my space to make it, to cut down on, like, travel time for me was a big waste of time. So I wanted to be able to, like, wake up and then be working and not have to have that commitment of travel time.
That's what I do now. That's what I do now. That I have that flex, and it took a while to get here, but I do work it. I have a live-work situation. It's just, I mean, that's the way I function best now. But you know, earlier to Michelle's point, like I needed that other mode of working where I had to go somewhere and get into a different state. I think it was like a trick into disciplining myself.
It's like a gym membership.
Yeah.
People buy a treadmill, $8,000 treadmill, and they never use it. It's a gym membership. Shape. Theoretically.
How do you guys find time for your personal lives? I mean, you were saying you've been married for 5 years. Sounds like that takes away from your art making. So how about the rest of you guys?
Well, I was going to say earlier that being in a long distance relationship is like the best thing for having a studio practice. I've been in one for, what, a year and a half now.
tough to maintain relationships if you've got, you know, your art career in mind, and then you've got your job in mind. But when you look out there, I mean, people can pull it off, and I've done it. I've seen people do it. A lot of my friends are thriving young artists, and have a job in some form, whether many of them are teachers at college level, and they're engaged or married or they have a significant other, and it's possible. I think you just, again, it's like you have to. For me, I did have to put that off until later. So I made a conscious decision, not to start a family until later. But of course, it's like mom and dad are always like, hey, what's going on? So it's a personal decision, but I do think it's very possible to pull it off. I mean, the proof's in the room.
I'm dating the same girl since college, so she's kind of used to it.
I mean, I had to undergo it when I was in graduate school, and I wasn't in a long distance relationship. And I mean, I just had to turn down things left and right, honestly. Like I just had to make decisions about the kinds of events that I really needed to be at. But that was a hard time. It's hard.
It's definitely, you sort of, we're talking about like studio practice and job, but your personal life and social life does really become the third element. And so you're really not just juggling two things, you're juggling three things.
I think it helps if all of your friends are artists. And then your social time
Yeah,
is
you
like
gotta say
going to
artists.
openings and it's kind of working on your career too. While
Yeah,
your
Rachel,
social
you
time-
should get up there.
No, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, my friends hold me accountable, and I know after work with them.
Yeah, that actually was one last question that I had, was just kind of how do you stay, you guys did touch on it a little bit, like how do you keep making your work? But I was just wondering if there's anything that you've set up like in your social life or specific parameters that you've given yourself that kind of helps you to find creativity or stay motivated to keep making new work and to keep pushing the envelope with the work that you're making.
For me, it's process, I guess. I'm really curious about how things work, and my work deals a lot with technology, so I mean that's constantly evolving and changing. So there's always something new to play around with, some expensive technology that's now you can download it in an afternoon. That's I think the thing that always keeps me kind of excited is the process of learning something new. More so than, I often shape my projects towards a technique or something that I'm curious about as opposed to thinking about content a lot of the times. Add content later.
It's just what I like to do the most. It just gives me the most pleasure. It's kind of when I feel most comfortable, just most centered, most in the zone. And so, years ago when I was working at the gallery that I mentioned, there were times where I had to take a break from the studio practice and just get into my job. And I remember my dad called me once and he's like, "Have you had any time in the studio lately, hon?" And I said, "No, actually not." He said, "I think you'd better get back in," sort of basically saying to me, "You're kind of in a bitchy mood." Like knowing that that's like, if my dad could have that perception, like, girlfriend, it was really, so that was kind of an important moment, just to realize, this is what centers me, and this is what I like to do the most. And clearly I'm not fun to be around if I'm not doing it.
I agree. I'm the same way. I think that there's a lot of things that motivate me. Like I noted before, my job, I think, really keeps me on my toes because I feel like I'm just constantly encountering new ideas that way. But more than anything, to question my work and not just be content with it as it is in my studio, but to bring it out into the world occasionally.
What's the question? Motivation? How to
Yeah.
find it? Oof, that's hard. I mean, the thing is, I think again, peers, like my peer group is ultra helpful in that, because, you know, you get together with someone and you guys are all talking about whatever it is you did in the studio, and it does kind of drive you a little bit, that friendly competitive spirit, so to speak. Just like, I mean, when I was at MICA, it was the same way. There was, you know, we all like to get together, but in the end, we were all saying, well, what'd you do for Howie's class? What'd you do for Buried Met, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, that culture has kind of followed me into my art practice now. I still stay in touch with a lot of friends from MICA. Many of them are my neighbors. So, you know, we see them around town and we get together. We do, you know, swap stories about old times, but we also talk about our practices, regardless of what medium we're working in or what facet of creativity we're in. So, yeah, that peer group motivates me highly.
All right, so we have just about 5 more minutes. Is there one last question?
A couple of you mentioned residencies before, and one thing that I always sort of come back to when I'm thinking about, you know, getting a job and, you know, wanting to still be a practicing artist is I almost become afraid of the idea of trying to apply to residencies, because what if I have, you know, a good stable job that I enjoy, you know, I've been able to do my art as well, then I apply to a residency and I get it, and I don't have enough time that I can take off of work. So I mean, like, how do you, I don't know, like,
How do you decide?
yeah, or like, I mean,
That's the thing is, I think I found myself in several situations like that, where it's like, do I quit my job and take this as an opportunity to go abroad, or do I stay in New York, keep my job, and just keep, you know, banging away at it here in the studio? And like, the thing is, it's a personal decision. When you feel it's right, it'll call you. And I think, you know, for me, in 2005, it was after the first initial few shows and a couple, like there was one review that came out, and after that, like my art started to really grow, and I had to ditch that. I made a decision to leave the previous job and take 6 months off to work towards my first solo. And it's funny, but like I made that decision at that time, had a chance to do a residency too. So, you know, I was lucky enough that I had just enough in the bank to float me through rent, you know, for that period of time. And then of course, once the show was over, with a few sales and then, you know, a pretty decent portfolio from the previous gig, I got a new job, which then gave me that life-work balance I have today. So I think it's a calling, and it's kind of like, you have to weigh the consequences, and you kind of just have to look at it and do the pros and cons. The best thing to probably do is to bounce it off of people that know you best, and get their advice on it as well, and factor that into your decision. But it's a tough decision to make. I have some friends that have found themselves in really amazing positions where they need to leave to go to, say, Germany for a residency, and it's a long residency, and what they were nervous about is they're like, what do I sublet my apartment, because I have such a great deal, but when I come back, the rent's going to be like triple, double, you know, it's like all those things. But then, is that opportunity that I'm going to go to going to lead me to the next thing? What next? And am I willing to take that, you know, direction? It's not a gamble or a chance, it's a direction. So look at it that way.
Plus, maybe you find a residency that you can work with. You know, there are 1-week ones, there are 2-week ones.
Right.
There are ones in the city in which you live. Or maybe you decide to just apply for a free studio instead, or maybe you decide to apply for a money grant instead. You know, with my job, I have a great gig now. It's 3 days a week, but even when I was working full time, I can't do residencies. I don't get that time off. You know, yes, I get 2 weeks. Well, I get 2 weeks in the summer at my current job, but I'm not going to ditch my husband, you know, for our vacation. So, you know, if something's working, it may rule out other things. And residencies, except for ones in the city in which I live, are things that I've never been able to do because of my job constraints. But I just do other things.
That's a great suggestion. There's a variety of them, and I mean, there are some that only last, you know, a small amount of time, and some that are greater. But if they're in your city and you can pull them off with a job, then you get the best of both worlds. Just by research, I think.
Yeah, I found a 2-week residency that I'm doing this year, and that's what I can afford to take off of my job, so that's what I'm doing. And hopefully that 2 weeks will kind of spark something new, so. And I'm the one looking for residencies, so. If you want to find a 2-week one, you come to me. All right, well, thank you guys so much. That was so